Chapter 4 deals with cell structure and function. We'll also revisit a little of Chapter 1, Section 4, where different parts of the microscope are discussed. So the cell is the smallest unit that can carry on all of the processes of life. Robert Hooke was one of the first people to see plant cells under a microscope, and what he saw were these little rectangular boxes that reminded him of the rooms that monks lived in, which were called cells, and that's where our cells got their name. So that was Robert Hooke. And another person that is important in the discovery of the cells was Anton von Leeuwenhoek. And this was back in the late 1600s, and he was the first one to see actual living cells. Hooke saw some old plant material, but he didn't actually see any living cells. Leeuwenhoek, who was a Dutch microscope maker, was the one that actually saw the first living cells. The cell theory is composed of three main parts, and it was designed by a trio of German scientists, Matthias Schleiden, Theodor Schwann, and Rudolf Virchow. And this was in the 1800s. And what they came up with was Schleiden contributed parts based on plants. He was a botanist, and he said that plants were composed of cells. Theodor Schwann, who was a geologist, said that animals were made of cells, and then Virchow, who was a physician, said that cells have to come from other cells. So the combination of all of their work gave us this cell theory. And the three main parts are that all living things are composed of cells, cells are the basic unit of an organism, and finally, cells come only from the reproduction of existing cells. Chapter 4, Section 2 introduces us into some basic information for cells. The cells are very diverse. Your body has over 200 different types of cells. Just some pictures here, some red blood cells, almost donut looking in appearance. Bacterial cells that are rod-like. These are some skin cells here. They're round and flat. So there's many different types of cells that make up our bodies. Most cells are going to be microscopic. They're very small. They average between 10 and 50 micrometers. So that's very, very small. And mainly they're limited in size by their surface area to volume ratio. The larger this ratio is, the more efficient the cell is. So basically, a cell can't grow so large as to not be able to then bring in enough material to support itself, enough nutrients, and excrete enough waste material, because its outer surface, its cell membrane, is what is going to determine what comes in and out of the cell. So if its membrane is not sufficiently large to support that cell, then that cell cannot continue to grow. So cell size is limited by the surface area to volume ratio, and the bigger the ratio is, the more efficient that cell is going to be. When calculating the surface area to volume ratio, surface area is length times width times the number of sides an object has, and volume, I'm sure you know, is length times width times height. So to take this ratio, we're going to do the surface area divided by the volume. And again, the larger that ratio is, the better it is for the cell. Cell shape is also a very important feature, and it's going to be determined by what sort of function that cell performs. So for instance, nerve cells are long and skinny. They need to be able to connect different parts of the body to transmit signals from the brain. Skin cells are going to be round and flat. White blood cells, they start off kind of round in shape, but they need to be able to change their shape in order to move through narrow openings that are in the body. So the cell shape really is determined by what kind of function that they need to perform. Some basic parts of a cell are the plasma or cell membrane. Okay, those are the same thing. And that's the outer surface, and it provides a barrier. It provides some structure and support. it also is what determines what enters and leaves the cell. The nucleus is towards the middle of the cell, and that's the control center. That's where you're going to find the DNA and all the directions that that cell needs to survive. The cytoplasm then is going to be pretty much the rest of the material inside the cell. There are little fluid pockets throughout the cytoplasm that's called the cytosol. And then within the cytoplasm, there's also cytoskeleton, which helps to provide support, much like our skeletons do for us. It gives it a little rigidity. And also, the organelles are located in the cytoplasm of the cell. The cytoplasm kind of helps to hold everything in place. And organelles are similar to our organs. They all have certain roles that they're going to play for the cell. And within the cytoplasm, specifically the cytosol, or those little fluid pockets, is where chemical reactions are going to occur. There are also two different main types of cells, prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells are earlier cells. They're actually literally translated mean before the nucleus. So they do have DNA still, but it's not surrounded in a true nucleus the way eukaryotic cells are. It's located in what's called the nucleoid region. Prokaryotic cells also do not have any membrane-bound organelles, unlike the eukaryotic cells, which have many of them to help that cell perform different functions. And prokaryotic cells are generally going to be single-celled organisms, whereas eukaryotic cells can be some single-cell organisms, but many multicellular organisms as well, such as ourselves. Our cells are eukaryotic. So prokaryotic were some of the first formed, and eukaryotic are a little more recent. We talked a little in Chapter 1 about organization, and with cells we need some sort of organization. There's a couple different types: true multicellular organisms or colonies. Now, colonies are just going to be identical cells that live in a connected group. So they're not truly multicellular. They don't actually coordinate many of their activities together. They're mainly just living together in the same location, usually because they're living close to a food source. A true multicellular organism is going to have their cells organized into tissues, tissues into organs, and then organs into organ systems to finally make that entire multicellular organism.